I had periods when I would cry myself to sleep. I wanted to cry it out. I was being a loner. Ever since I was a child, as far as I can remember, I've always been kind of like the one different in the group. I don't want to say the odd one out because I think that sounds kind of negative, but I've always been the different one. When I was at school, I was either the youngest girl in class or the new girl because I moved quite a lot. My parents were separated and I moved between both of them. Each time we moved, I had to change school, right? So I was always the new girl in class, the one that everyone had to get used to or everyone had to get to know. And usually, just as we were getting to know each other, I would move again. So I was always different. Now, when I look at my family, it's pretty much the same thing. I'm not trying to be special or anything, but I was just different from the rest of my family. I looked different in the sense that I was skinny compared to the rest of the family. I didn't like the same kinds of food. My thought process was quite different from the rest of my family. I was more bookish compared to the rest of my family. My brother is 5 years older than I am, so that means I was pretty much alone. I had to learn how to play by myself. I could play card games by myself. I could be the two-person player or even a multiplayer, like 4 people play. And because it was a time before mobile phones and before the internet, it was fine. I was able to do it, at least by myself. I couldn't play with the neighbors because either they were attending different schools than I was, or just because they were so different from me. Now, when it comes to friends, it was more or less the same thing, right? As a teenager, when I was in high school, most of my friends were usually interested in something different from what I was. I loved to read. I loved to study. Most of them were more into boys or going out and having fun. And we lived quite far away from each other, so it wasn't easy for me to always hang out with them. And then once we finished high school, we all had different goals and interests in terms of university. We went to different states. We lost touch. Thank God for Facebook. Now we're back in touch, but it's not the same once you've been separated for so long. Now, moving on to my adult life, I moved to Malta when I was 30 years old. I live in Malta now. And ever since then, it's been kind of difficult to make friends. I made a video about having no friends. If you haven't watched that, I think you should watch that after this one, because there I speak more about how I feel regarding the fact that I have no friends. And if, by the way, you like videos like this, if you're watching this, you're probably like me, you're probably a loner or alone. I will be making more videos like this. And my goal is to reach out to you and to try to motivate you to live a much more fuller life. So if you think this is something you would like, please consider subscribing and like this video so that more people can come across it. I've talked about myself being a loner. Let's look at loneliness on the other hand. It's a big difference. They're not the same thing. Although I am a loner without friends, I am not lonely right now. I do have moments of loneliness, but right now I cannot say that I am lonely. Let's look at the definition of both of them. Being alone is a state of being isolated, which in most cases and for most people is a choice. And this is a choice that most people can make. You can decide, okay, I don't want to be alone right now. I just want to go somewhere and be amongst people. So it's a decision that you can change. On the other hand, loneliness is a feeling. Loneliness is a deep emotion that signals the absence of meaningful qualitative connections with other people. This is something that we cannot control because it's more about how the outside world affects us, okay? Now, it is more complicated than just that definition, of course. I've experienced both in my lifetime. I am 41 right now, so I have definitely come across both ever since I was a kid to my 20s. My 30s, maybe not so much because I met my husband and he filled up a lot of space in my life. But otherwise, I've been alone and I've been lonely in my lifetime. So I'm going to talk about loneliness a little bit deeper. After researching what loneliness really means, I came across 3 major types of loneliness. The first type is emotional loneliness. This is basically a lack of meaningful connections with other people. You know, that feeling that you just want people to understand you, to know who you really are, and that's missing because of whatever reason, maybe they just don't pay attention. That's emotional loneliness. In my 20s, I felt this a lot. The second type of loneliness is social loneliness. In this case, it is a lack of qualitative relationships, so that you might be surrounded by thousands of people. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but you might be surrounded by so many people, by so many friends and family, and yet still feel like you are not connecting with them, still feel lonely. That's because of quality versus quantity. So being lonely doesn't mean that you have to be with people. It's more about the connection, right? So you can be alone, but not feel lonely because you're connected to yourself. And that's what I learned at a very early age, to connect to myself. Now, the third kind of loneliness is existential loneliness. And that's when you feel disconnected from the rest of the world, when you feel like you're alone and nobody in the world is like you. Now, everybody goes through moments of being alone and moments of feeling lonely over their lifetime. There is nobody that is exempt from this rule. In my case, I think I've felt them, or a combination of each of these kinds of loneliness over the years. So let's look at my childhood, for example. As a child, I think that I felt more a lack of social connections and the existential loneliness, because I just felt like I was different from every child. Everyone around me was just having fun, and they had different backgrounds, home backgrounds. They had parents that were together. They had a mom and a dad all the time, and I was quite different from them. Or maybe they spoke a different language. When I was growing up, I spoke only English most of the time. And so it was difficult for me to connect with some other kids because they would have their own local language that they would be speaking. And I would just be there like, okay. And sometimes I would understand, but I just didn't speak. So that made it even more difficult for me to connect with them. There were kids that attended other schools in the area. And I usually had after school as well. So by the time I got home, I would be so tired. I wouldn't have time to go out and socialize with other kids. However, don't get me wrong, I loved school. I still love learning right now. I work at a school. So I enjoyed my time at school. I enjoyed not just the interactions that I had with my peers and my teachers, but also the process of learning. So it wasn't such a big deal for me, that social loneliness. However, the existential loneliness, that was something that I had to come to terms with as a child. And as a child, I'm talking about 7, 8 years old. The first time I think that I was aware of it was when my great-grandma died. And that was when I was really introduced into, what death really was like. And nobody explained anything to me. Nobody sat me down to talk to me. So I had to process everything by myself in my mind. I remember being in the car and looking up at the sky, maybe at night, looking at the moon and asking questions like, why is the moon following us? Or why is there a moon? Why is there a God? Who is God? And who created God? Questions like that. And who created me? Why was I created? I couldn't get those answers from the people around me. My family, it's not like they didn't love me. My mom and my dad, I always felt loved by my mom and my dad. My brother, of course. But my relatives, for example, just didn't get me at all. I was just completely different from the rest of my cousins and my aunts. I wasn't like them because I could see them in groups doing similar things and enjoying similar things, which I didn't enjoy. So I felt quite disconnected in that sense. Being introverted, I think, helped me to get to know myself and to understand my place in this world, and to recognize my purpose and to have goals and dreams and work towards those goals and dreams. And thank goodness my parents supported me. Even if they didn't understand me, they supported my goals. If I said I wanted to be a doctor, I remember I wanted to be a doctor, and they just like, okay, what do you need to be a doctor? They supported me as much as they could in their own way. I had that support. I had that emotional connection. So I wasn't lonely emotionally, but I was lonely socially and existentially. But thank God I was able to overcome the existential part, which I think the best way to overcome that is to not hide away from yourself. It's good to be alone. When you're alone, that's the only time that you can self-reflect. That's the only time that you can know who you truly are, accept yourself, and love yourself. So being alone is not a bad thing. If you are alone right now, use that opportunity to get to know yourself better. What are the things that you like doing? And find a way to love yourself, no matter what. Maybe it's your physical self, maybe it's your emotional self, whatever it is that you might be going through. Being alone is the moment that you can reconcile with who you really are. Okay? Because if you are feeling depressed, if you're feeling miserable when you're alone, then you're in bad company. And that means that you have to work on yourself. If you're in your own company and you feel miserable, then that's a problem. So that's how I experienced loneliness as a child. Now, in my 20s, I had more emotional and social loneliness. So emotional in the sense that, when you're in your 20s, you're no longer seeking emotional validation from your parents, at least for most people. You're now seeking it from your peers. You are comparing yourself to people around you. So you are also at that age where you want to have romantic relationships. And so when you look at the next person and you're like, oh, they have all the boys and they have a good relationship going on and I don't, and why me and all of that, you feel left out. You feel lonely. In my 20s, that's when I had that disconnection. And I think that what made it worse was the fact that most young men my age didn't think in the same way that I did. Most of them, we have to admit it, most men in their 20s and beyond are mostly interested in one thing. And that wasn't what I was ready to give at that time. I was more interested in discussing life, discussing more important topics, or even if they were not super important, going deep into conversations, having deeper conversations. So I would have liked to talk about archaeology or history, for example, or the things that I like and why I like them. But all the conversations I used to have with young men then were just so superficial, nothing deep. So I didn't feel connected. And so I would just perhaps go on a date once and twice and just like, okay, that's it. This is not for me. And I had sleepless nights. I had periods when I would cry myself to sleep. It wasn't just, okay, I'm feeling sad and I'm crying. It was like I wanted to cry it out. I wanted to cry out my frustration. And nobody knew. I think this is the first time that I'm talking about it. Nobody knew that I had those nights where I would just cry and cry and cry. And then I would feel better and get to sleep. So in my 20s, I had to navigate through both emotional and social loneliness. Now in my 40s, it's completely different because I met my husband and he has filled up the gap of that emotional loneliness. So he's my emotional support. I know that I can connect with him in that way. My dad's never really got me. He never really understood me fully, but he was always there for me. So I had partial emotional connection with him. And my mom, God bless her soul, rest in peace, mommy, I love you so much. But they didn't get me. So it was just partial in that sense. Now with my husband, he doesn't get me like 100%, but 90%. So I'm completely satisfied in that terms. But when it comes to existential loneliness, that has been filled by myself. Because I think the only person that can help you reconcile your position in the world is you. So when you know who you are in the world, you don't have to feel lonely because you can be your own support system. If I cannot meet people who are exactly like me, that's fine. I can just be by myself and I can just be my own best friend. So in terms of emotional and existential loneliness, I don't feel those two anymore. But occasionally I do feel this social loneliness, and that's because of the no friends situation. I do have one friend though that I would consider a very good friend, but not a best friend. I can talk to her, but I don't think I've ever really spoken to her this deeply as I'm talking to you right now. But I feel like if I went further, I think she would be there to listen, right? And it's not a one-sided relationship. We are not always in contact, but we take time out to make sure that we contact each other. However, in a friendship of 5 years, she's never invited me to her home. She's been to mine several times. I've invited her to gatherings with other friends of mine to bring everybody together, because I don't think it makes sense to have separate groups of friends. Maybe it works for people, but for me, I'd rather just have everyone together, have that time together, and then, okay, let me recharge my batteries alone. I don't have time to make time for this group of friends and then that group of friends, and then no time for myself. She has been with me in different situations, but she's never invited me into her life per se. She's never invited me into any family functions that she's had. She's never invited me into any other friendships that she's had. So I cannot call her my best friend, because I think if you have a best friend, someone that you're really, really connected to, I think you should be able to share every or most aspects of your life, right? So I still miss that connection, that social part, having another female friend in my life that I can just text and say, hey, this is what's going on. How do you feel about this new hobby of mine? Like starting a YouTube channel, for example. I didn't tell anyone because they wouldn't get me. So I just kept it to myself. I think I'm actually happy that I did. But yeah, that part is missing. So let's look at how we can navigate through loneliness, because everyone's going to feel lonely at some point in their lives. Whether you are alone or around people, you're going to go through that period of disconnection. So how do we navigate through loneliness? These are the things that I did over the years that helped me overcome most of my issues with loneliness. If you're watching this and you're feeling lonely, I'd like you to try at least one or a combination of these things, okay? So the first thing I'd like you to try to do is to practice self-love and self-care. So self-love is not being selfish. Self-love doesn't mean that you have to spend a lot of money on things like getting a massage or anything like that. No. Self-love can just be putting your phone down, stop scrolling through social media, but keep watching this video, okay? Stop scrolling through meaningless, short 10-second videos and put it down and think about something that you actually enjoy doing. Maybe it's reading a book, or maybe it's baking or cooking or coming up with new recipes. And just do it for, let's say, 5 minutes a day, and then slowly increase that amount of time. But you have to make time out to do that thing. So you have to do something that gives you a sense of accomplishment. So for me, one of the things that I love to do is read. And I haven't really been reading much ever since I got also sucked into the brain rot of social media. And I've been trying to do that more often nowadays. The second thing I'm going to suggest that you do is to take things slow and live life more intentionally. And what I mean by that is not to think too far into the future, because that's another thing that makes us even feel more lonely, because we think, oh my God, how am I going to continue my life living this way? I can't continue this way. And we forget about the little things in the moment. So you have to live a bit more intentionally. Make small plans for your day. Include something joyful in your day. So it could be maybe taking a walk outside. You never know. You could come across someone who's also taking a walk, and you can have a chat and just have a meaningful conversation. Insert something that would give you value and do it intentionally. The third thing is to open up a little bit more to people around you. So when you have met someone that you think might be a friend, don't expect too much of them, because then you might get disappointed. But don't be afraid to open up a little bit to them, because some people might just be like you, right? They're waiting for the other person to open up. You can be that first person. Of course, gauge their reactions, gauge their behaviors before you start opening to them. But just open up a little at a time. And that's what I've been doing with my friend. Like I said, she isn't letting me completely into her life. Maybe one day I'm going to just ask him like, hey, why don't you invite me to your place? Maybe that's what she's waiting for, right? But I haven't gotten there yet, but it's been a long, slow process to where we are right now. And I'm okay for now where I am. So you think about something that is holding you from opening up and just try to be a little bit friendlier, okay, with other people. Now, the last thing, the fourth and final thing that I'm going to ask you to do is not compare yourself with anybody else. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make. We look at other people's relationships, especially on social media right now, and they look perfect and they look amazing. They look like they're having a lot of fun. You know, if they have a group of friends, they're always out together. But that isn't always the truth. And we know that, right? So do not look at what other people show you on the surface, but rather just focus on yourself. You know, let them go, let them be, let them have their fun, let them have their lives. It's not your life. So don't compare yourself with other people, because then we start to feel like we are not good enough, like our lives are just a mess, right? And not everyone has it all together. No matter how much they appear to have it all together, not everyone does. And I think that should be a thought that you should think about when you look at other people. Take solace in that, in the fact that you are not alone in feeling lonely. So if you have found this video useful, please let me know. What do you think about the difference between being alone and loneliness? Do you think they are the same thing? For me, I think being alone doesn't mean that you are lonely. I think that you can find friendship with yourself. You can find a deeper connection with yourself. And when you find that connection, I think that that enables you to be able to open up in a more healthy way, in a more mentally present way with other people. So let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget again to subscribe and like, and I will see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.